Hi, I'm Darren Charles and welcome to the Rat Pack Burlesque Talk Show. This week we will be talking to the international burlesque superstar Miss Eliza Delite all about costume creation and her creative process. Hi Eliza.
Hello Darren Charles, thank you for having me. So how did I get into burlesque? I've been performing burlesque roughly about 13 years. Growing up, I had a keen interest in quite a broad spectrum of artistic subjects. I was incredibly interested in dance and drama, but I was also very keen on photography and fine art. These artistic pursuits followed me all the way through until I discovered burlesque in 2008. All my years of studying art and performance and photography and film suddenly all came crashing together and made perfect sense. These were things that I could tie into being a burlesque performer. Everything from designing costumes to thinking about stage lighting to thinking about choreography and also the music that I was going to be using on stage. When I'm creating burlesque acts, I always try and think of them very much from an artistic perspective. And one of the things that I talk to my students about when I'm mentoring is thinking about the stage as a canvas and you are creating an image for your audience. The costume side of burlesque is something that really excites me because the possibilities are endless, and I love to pull together lots of different influences from contemporary fashion to old Hollywood costumes to modern couture. I remember the first time I fell in love with costume. I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And I was taking part in a local pantomime at my local church. And this was a production that I think had been running since the 1960s. And they had this costume store cupboard underneath the stage in the church, which held costumes that they'd probably been using for 30 odd years. To me, this was just the most magical thing ever. And something that also struck me in that costume store was this musty smell that you would recognize if you go into an antique shop or a vintage shop. And I think this is probably my first memory of developing a love for old costumes and old clothing. One of my most iconic acts, and the act that I'm going to talk about today, is my act Ziegfeld Girl, which is taking inspiration from the film of the same name, starring the iconic Hedy Lamarr. In 2012, I first developed my Ziegfeld Girl act, and it fast became one of my most requested acts. It travelled with me all over the world, from San Francisco to Stockholm to New Orleans, and graced many debaucherous New Year's Eve parties. I really loved this act, but eventually, like with many burlesque costumes, time took its toll and it was no longer really wearable on stage. Then in 2019, I finally got the call to bring this act back to life and bring it back to the stage. So how did I develop the act? Well, back in 2012, I was in a vintage shop in Nottingham when I came across the most incredible pair of original 1950s dance costumes. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before in the flesh, and they were not very expensive either, so I bought them both. I started to delve a little deeper into looking at old Hollywood costumes for movie musicals and dance numbers. And this is where I began my collection of old movie magazines, which served as an amazing source of inspiration for costumes. It was through looking back at all these old movie musicals that I finally discovered Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr is an inspirational woman for many reasons. She was often considered one of the most beautiful women in Hollywood. But at the same time, she was also an incredible scientist, and she invented a technology which today modern Wi-Fi is based on. Many people have been inspired by this iconic costume that Hedy Lamarr wore in the film Ziegfeld Girl, but I hadn't yet seen an authentic historical recreation of this costume, and this was a challenge that I was ready to take on. The original dress worn by Hedy Lamarr in the film Ziegfeld Girl was designed by Gilbert Adrian, otherwise known as Adrian, and he was a Hollywood costumier who often dressed many of Hollywood's leading ladies. One of Adrian's most famous achievements was developing the ruby slippers used in The Wizard of Oz. We don't actually see what Hedy Lamarr is wearing under her costume, so this is where a little bit of creative license had to come in, and I had to think about what might be underneath that magnificent dress. Whilst I was staying true to my original showgirl leotard bodysuit, I also started to look at more contemporary inspirations. I worked with Jo, otherwise known as Gem Corsets, and together we developed a design that would both be aesthetically pleasing and practical. By November 2019, Gem Corsets had completed the corset bodysuit for this costume, and I took it with me on a special sourcing trip. I went all the way to New York to search the New York garment district for the perfect trimmings for this costume. This costume was definitely one of the most challenging projects I have done to date, but thankfully I was able to call upon my years of experience and lessons that I had learned through previous costume projects. I could not have done this without the help of my incredible dressmaker Louise Holland McCormack, my milliner Fern Breen, and my corset maker Gem Corsets. When you're creating a new act, there are a few things that you should definitely consider, especially when it comes to costume. One of the things you should be thinking about are the practicalities of the costume that you're going to use for your act. You could have the most elaborate, over-the-top, fantastical costume or headdress covered in rhinestones, but if you can't move in it, if you can't dance in it, then it's not going to work and you're going to struggle to engage with your audience. Be sure to think about these things before you start making so that it's easier along the line when it comes to the final choreography. This is definitely something I had to take into consideration with my Hedy Lamarr act, as it is definitely one of the most challenging costumes I've ever worn or performed in. Not only do you need to make sure that your costume is one that you can move and dance in, but can you strip out of it easily? There is nothing worse than getting stuck on stage in your costume, so make sure you plan how you're going to remove it and that it's something that you can do within the music that you have and within your choreography. Showgirl logistics are also very important, and you want to make sure that when you're designing your costume, you're taking into consideration how you are going to store, pack, and transport your costume. Make sure you design your costume so that you can pack it safely without it getting damaged, and that it's not so heavy that you cannot lift your suitcase. If you would like to find out a little bit more about what I do, you can find me on Instagram at Eliza Delite, or if you'd like to learn more about how I made this costume and all its secrets, you can join my Patreon at www.patreon.com/Eliza Delite. I also offer bespoke one-to-one burlesque mentoring, so if you're looking to up your game, then please do get in touch with me via my email address, eliza_delite@hotmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to see more, please comment, like, subscribe, or you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or on our website, the ratpackburlesqueshow.com, where you can see more episodes like this and find out where our latest live performances will be.